Okay, so what I wanted to do today was address something that I kind of skipped over last week. I was going to attach this to source control, but I realized I didn't have a GitHub credential made on my instance yet, and I didn't want to risk showing off an API key or anything like that, so I just skipped over that process and said, I'll do source control another time. But during that time, if anybody was there, we kind of had a internal monologue, a couple of us musing on whether we should do GitHub or source control directly from my local machine into a GitHub repository, or should we utilize the ServiceNow version of source control that also attaches to Git or GitHub, because that's two different ways, and almost everybody in the ServiceNow world would be used to doing it via the platform. So as a reminder for anybody that might be watching this, the way that you normally do source control for your applications within the ServiceNow platform, there's two main ways that you can do it. For those that are a little bit more old school, you would go to Studio. Well, let me let this load first. You would go to Studio, and then you would attach one of these applications to source control. You would say link to source control, and you would put in your repository URL, select your credential, pick the branch. Usually, you can either let it name it for you, or you can use main or whatever the defaults are, and then you would link it to source control. Now it would be in GitHub. The other way to do it would be through App Engine Studio. Similarly, you go in here, pick an app, and then link it to source control. So if I load up the ones we've been working on, up here is a source control button, and you can link it to source control, same fields as the other studio. So that's the normal way to do it. The more traditional coding way to do it, if you're a traditional dev, I keep doing this, traditional dev, you would create your repositories through your local Git, because you would have Git installed on your computer, on your local machine, and you would commit to local versions of your repository, and then you would push it to wherever it's stored remotely, like GitHub or Gitbucket or anything like that. And you would work directly from that. And so there's so many different implications of, well, do I do it that way, the traditional way, or do we do it through the ServiceNow way, which is what everyone's used to? Hey, Wiz. So we were talking about on the last stream, I think we should do it via the normal ServiceNow way, and then I would pull that repository into my computer and work from there instead. Then everybody would be able to install it through the normal ways of doing it in ServiceNow. But then I kept thinking about that, if I'm doing it that way, where with an app linked directly from ServiceNow to GitHub, then I would want to be committing the same way and pulling code the same way, but I want to use the SDK. And so that would create conflicts wildly back and forth. And so I just went over to the product team and asked. I messaged Jay, and I said, hey, Jay, do you recommend this way? And I explained the normal ServiceNow way. Or would I just publish my folder directly to a GitHub repository and work from there and push and pull from there? And he said the latter. So we're going to completely ignore ServiceNow's source control and use source control the more traditional way, which I guess if you're using the SDK and CLI, that's probably what you're used to. It's just that now I want to make sure that people that are only within the ServiceNow ecosystem make sure they know what they should be doing to get that to work. So we're going to be working on that today. What I want to try to do is link this to source control, and then show that I can push and pull this app to another instance, all from my one local instance of this app. So some of this some of these steps I'm gonna be skipping. Hey, Ailey, welcome. I'm going to be taking some liberties and skipping a few steps because my machine has always been set up with a lot of this stuff because of like Hacktoberfest and stuff like that. So I'm going to try to explain some of the steps that new viewers might be missing, but this is how you would link to source control if you're working out of the SDK, and then how to push and pull into new instances. So I already have a bunch of updates on this app that I've converted from ServiceNow into the SDK. And then I want to do source control. On VS Code, there's a bunch of little tabs on the side. One of them is source control. The first one, initialize repository. That's if you want to initialize a place to store this app on your local machine and potentially push it to a remote server like GitHub later. But if you go into VS Code's extensions and look for GitHub, there is an extension called GitHub Desktop. And that's the one you want to install completely. And then you'll be able to do a lot of the GitHub steps through VS Code. And so if I want to push this through source control so that anybody can utilize this and everyone can start working on it if they want to. I press publish to instance, publish to GitHub. If you've not linked your VS Code yet, this is where it would open up a auth, basically a login system for you to log into GitHub to say, this is my account. I want to give access to it. I have two-factor on, so then it would also send a notification to my phone, or I have to open it up and do a number two-factor into it. But I've already done that step, so that's what you don't see. So again, things I've skipped over. Installing GitHub Desktop and linking it and the integration into VS Code, and then logging into my account already. I've already done that. And I want to create a public repository, and I want all of this, the entire folder, to be included. So I'm going to say that. And what did it name it? Well, it's loading. I haven't done this part yet, so this is me doing it live. Wow, there's a lot of files in here. So a lot of that is packages of the Node.js and like all of the different libraries that are included in here. So it is building the repository, I believe. There it is. And publishing it. And then I'm going to open up GitHub and see if that folder is there. Let me put this on a different screen while I wait for that. And let's see if that repository has made it. Okay. So here's my GitHub account. And there it is, Earlio instance. And if I look at it, it should have all of my new stuff, including, yep. And there's my to-do list that I've been showing on my screen and everything. So it's really straightforward on how to do source control if you have these things installed on your computer. That's how fast it was for me to initialize a new repository and push it into Git along with my new stuff. So that problem of me accidentally, I really messed up a field last time because I made a change on the platform and then didn't fetch that change in my SDK, and that got overwrote when I deployed it, and then it messed up a dictionary field really badly. All of that would have been solved if I had just made sure that this was source controlled first, because I could always roll back a source control or go back to an earlier version. Okay, so now that that is done, I'm going to show me attaching this app to a new instance. And so if y'all remember, so this is Earlio, my Earlio instance, and it's here. I have it installed under this app. It's called SN. Load faster. My SDK app is called SNDP-Twitch, so ServiceNow Dev Program Twitch. That's my app. And it's installed on the Earlio instance. And if I go to the Earl instance, which I also have, and log in real quick, you'll see that this app doesn't exist. I try to push in SNDP-Twitch and it didn't go through. So what I want to do is install that app into this instance because it doesn't have it yet. And if I go back to VS Code, I am currently in my SDK, and it's doing that weird thing again. But if I go through the SDK and look through all the commands, the things that you want to remember to do is create a new authentication for an instance, and then you're going to deploy it. So right now, if I go to NOW-SDK auth list, it'll show that I have two authentications, both for the Earlio instance, one as my Able Tutor account and one as Earlio, my admin account, Earl.2k. And so whenever I say things like deploy or fetch, it will automatically go to the default one right here. So my default authentication alias is this one, Earlio, and it automatically will push it to earlio.service-now.com under the username of Earl.2k. Because it's my default alias. But now I want to push it to a different instance. So what I'm going to do is say NOW-SDK auth save, and I'm going to call this one Earl because that's my Earl instance, and it's going to should walk me through. Oh, interesting. So it's asking if I want it to be just deploying to my local computer, because technically it's stored on my local computer right now. But right now I'm going to want to push it to earl.servicenow.com. And then it's going to ask me for, username. So I try to default to admin, but I have a earl.2k one here, and then my password. And then it's going to try to log in. Yeah, okay, it did. So if I do auth list again, it should show 3 now. There, okay, perfect. So I have one alias for my Earl instance, and I have two aliases for my Earlio instance. And now, but I notice that I still have default set to my Earlio instance. So now, if I ever want to push to anything not to my Earlio, my default instance, I have to just make sure to add this parameter to it and then say which alias to use, like so. And so I'm gonna make sure I fetch from the Earlio instance default just to make sure it's synced up. And now I'm going to deploy to the Earl instance. And I think that's all I need to say is NOW-SDK deploy under the authentication of Earl. So it should be pushing it. We're waiting, and it looks like it did it. So now if I jump back into my Earl instance and refresh, up here, I can go in, wait for it to load, of course. And if I look for SNDP Twitch, if I click on it, then, oh, where'd it go? What happened? Well, it switched to the scope. Am I in it? Oh yeah, because that's just a switching of the scope. Right, okay, so if I open the application page, and we're waiting, and here it is, exactly as I left it. In fact, let me go check under my module table, and here's that to-do list that I showed earlier. Now I've deployed this one app to 2 instances, all via the SDK. And if I ever make changes to this app, which we're going to do on stream right now, I can push this to source control and we'll be good. But yeah, so that's how the SDK source control works. Really straightforward. And to demonstrate even further, I'm going to move this silly to-do file out of the source folder into a README file with Markdown, basically. So if where it should be not under metadata. Is there a README file on here? Oh, no README file. Okay, I'll create one. So readme.md, because I like Markdown. I'm going to move all that stuff here, and I'm going to replace all of these silly / with, I think the notation is like, is it this for checkboxes or is it the other way around? Okay, it's dash and then the checkbox. Perfect. So I'm going to replace all of that. Oops, let me add a space to that. All right, now it's a checkbox. It should be at least. And this is Markdown, so I can start making categories instead. Oh, this should be a category. Okay. Sammy, Twitch, ServiceNow. I fixed that one, so I'll mark that as okay. Sorry, I got carried away with updating my checklist. We don't need this JS file anymore because it wasn't actually doing anything for JS, so I'm going to delete that. And we should be good. Let me build and deploy this. Build, deploy to Earlio. So once that builds and deploys, I'm going to source control it, which I guess I should have done first, doing things out of order. Okay, so that's done. You know what? I'm actually interested in seeing on my Earlio instance what happens to the that file in the module table. Is it still there? Or does it get deleted? Oh, it got deleted, as it should have. Cool. Yeah, that to-do file's not here anymore. All right, cool. So it probably deletes it. Okay, so that's working. So let's go commit that to source control so I can see the prettier Markdown file. And if this is your first time doing source control directly without going through ServiceNow, a lot easier, in my opinion, than going through the ServiceNow's integration of source control. But when you update any of your files inside of your SDK and your folder on your computer, you'll notice the number of changes on files will appear over the source control button. So according to this, 8 of my files have been changed. And here you can actually go through and look at what has been changed. Like if I click on here, all this green means I've added these lines, and because it's a new file, it's all green. Similarly, if I go to the to-do file, it will show as deleted up here. But I can also look at other changes. So it looks like some metadata files have also been changed automatically when I deployed. So you're going to expect a lot of those things to automatically update whenever you do a deploy or a fetch. But if everything looks good here, what you want to always do is provide a good, clear commit message of what you just did. So moved my to-do list from source.js file to a root Markdown file. And I will commit that. And so now I've committed those changes to my local version of this app, which is still on my computer. And then the sync button will show up and it says, hey, if you press this button, I'm going to take your version of the app and I'm going to push it to the remote location. And that will be the newest version. Sometimes you'll see a down arrow, and that means, hey, there's changes on the remote app, that you don't have yet, you can download them now. And sometimes you'll see both, because you can do both if those files aren't in conflict. And if there are conflicts, then that's when you would choose which file is correct or merge them. That's called merge conflicts, and you would work through those. But if you're not working on the same files as somebody else, or you don't get too desynced, then it should be a pretty simple download everything or upload everything. And so right now I have upload everything. I'm going to go ahead and push those changes to the remote and say, okay. And all from VS Code, I have updated my app. I have deployed to a new instance. I have I've attached it to source control, and I have updated the source control so that other people looking at the repository can now access all of my changes. And if I jump back to GitHub and go back to the base of this repository, there's my new README file with all the checkboxes, because Markdown interprets it properly as checkboxes, if you know the notation. And now anybody that goes to this github.com/earlduque/Earlio instance will be able to see my to-do list and take this entire app, sync it to your computer, download it to your computer, and then run the SDK to deploy it to your own instance. There you go. Whew. Sometimes I think I'm going to be able to explain this stuff really quickly, but 30 minutes has already passed, and now I realize I am so wordy, and these videos get long, and I'm thankful for anybody that is watching the video on demand afterwards that sat through all of that. Welcome to the SDK and source control. Yay! Okay, let's shift gears.